Too scandalous a story. Come out with your hands up. Let the boy go first. Don't do anything rash. I bet our neighbors really enjoyed all the free entertainment we were responsible for. Police cars everywhere, all aimed at the house where my son and I had been living in secrecy until now. Guns, assault rifles, and one man in a suit with a megaphone trying to tell me what to do. I remembered where it all started. Trudy, Darren, and I had been friends for a long time, since middle school. It was usually me with Trudy and Darren with someone on double dates. It wasn't unusual for Darren and his date to leave us early so he could take his girlfriend to the parking lot. Darren was a charmer who was the envy of the guys at heart. I joked to him that he could make love to a guy's wife in front of him and convince the husband that he was saving his wife's life and make the husband thank him. And I wouldn't rule out that one day he might actually try that. Of course, he tried to hit on Trudy a few times, despite our friendship, and liked to do dirty dances with her. Trudy laughed when I asked about his molestations of her, and she replied, "I don't see how any girl could be so stupid as not to realize that he was only interested in getting under her skirt. Trust me, Andy, Darren is the last person you need to worry about seducing me. We've been close friends for years. Darren and I went to college and majored in business. Trudy majored in accounting. She said the opportunity to put together a balanced spreadsheet gave her pleasure. To each his own. My father helped me get started in the wine business, and Darren and Trudy invested in it. Based on the amount of money each invested, I had 40% of the business, Darren had 40%, and Trudy had 20%. I was the head of operations, Darren was in charge of sales and marketing, and Trudy did the bookkeeping. It took us a few years to become profitable and a few more to become very profitable when the wine craze started. Trudy and I put off having children until we got our finances sorted out. I told her we were close to the time when she could stop taking the pill. She didn't seem as excited as I expected. One night there was a knock on our front door. I looked through the peephole. It was the police. When I opened the door, the male officer asked, "Are you Andrew Miller?" "I am." "Andrew Miller, you're under arrest for embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." "Embezzlement? I own part of a business. How could I embezzle from myself?" I turned to Trudy, who had a look of betrayal on her face. "Andy, how could you?" Darren and I didn't want to believe it, but the independent audit proved it to us. "I can't believe you took advantage of your wife and best friend. You and I are done. You'll be served with divorce papers in prison." My life went to hell in 2 minutes. I was speechless. Then I realized it. I started laughing. "Trudy, you and Darren made me really believe it. Damn Darren and his shenanigans." The police officer spoke up. "I assure you, sir, that this is no joke. Now put your hands behind your back." He was treating me rather rudely, so I pulled away from him. Bad move on my part. Before I knew it, I was on the floor and I was handcuffed, not caring about my comfort. He jerked me up and finished reading me my rights. Trudy stood, crocodile tears streaming down her face. The enormity of her betrayal only now came upon me in full force. I realized that she and Darren had collaborated to get rid of me for several reasons. I barely made it to my cell before I was served with divorce papers. Since I had allegedly embezzled funds from the business, she wanted all of my 40% of the business instead of half in the divorce. In exchange, she would not require alimony and would take over the house payments. When and if it was sold, I would get half of the equity in what was the mortgage to date. I wasn't surprised when Darren came to visit. Andy, you stupid gullible asshole. Trudy and I have been lovers for a long time. It doesn't matter that you didn't embezzle. We have the evidence to put you in jail for a long, long time. Even if you quit, you don't have a job at the company. Right now, Trudy and I control 60% and we'll get 100% if you sign the papers. Even if you don't agree, we'll have 80% after the divorce if the 50-50 rule applies. As the head of one of the top companies in the area, I have the influence to make it easier or harder for you in prison. It's up to you. By the way, Trudy sends her regards. As he walked away, he laughed. I refused to sign, but Darren somehow tracked the speed of the divorce, and I got divorced at about the same time the trial started. Even though I was innocent and knew who had falsified the books, Darren, Trudy, and the so-called independent auditor all claimed I had embezzled over $500,000. I had no way of proving that I had not. Darren or Trudy opened a bank account in my name in the Cayman Islands where I supposedly stashed the money. Darren pretended to forgive me, asking for leniency as the money was returned. I remained in prison and was sentenced to 10 years. Darren and Trudy were married a week after our divorce. 6 months later, I heard that Trudy had given birth to a baby boy, supposedly 2 months premature. He weighed 3 pounds. I remembered my developmental psychology class well enough to smell something suspicious. Unless the baby was actually premature, that meant he had been conceived while Trudy and I were still making love. He could have been my son. I was in no position to demand a DNA test, but I quickly realized why Darren might have been in such a hurry to divorce me and he and Trudy get married. What the hell could I do about it while in prison? I tried to find a way to tolerate prison life. Then COVID happened. Thank God. Not that I wanted anyone to die from it. Well, maybe Darren and Trudy. Given the risk to people living in crowded places, our governor commuted the sentences of all non-violent offenders. I was free, but I was afraid of what Darren might do to me once I got out of prison. Instead of taking the prison van to the halfway house, I called a cab. When they opened the cab door, I ran up to him and told him to drive as fast as he could. We drove in circles, back up the trail and down a narrow alley before I was sure no one was following us. I bought clothes from some vagrant and headed for the tent city for the homeless that had sprouted up on the main streets downtown. The conditions were horrible and unsanitary, so no one dared to bother me there. However, I had to learn to breathe through my mouth. I left my beard on during the day, but I cleaned myself up and put on better clothes while I looked for a place to sleep where I could hide. I found a nice older lady who was renting out a room, mainly to have someone around for security purposes. It wasn't the nicest neighborhood, but having lived there for 40 years, she had no intention of moving. Her son participated in the interview with me. I passed his test. He also owned a lawn mowing and leaf raking business and was hiring. Soon I had a job wearing clothes I didn't normally wear, in a body that had lost over 13 pounds in prison, and with facial hair I had never had before, which was dyed along with the hair on my head. I doubted that many people who knew me before prison would recognize me. After working that job for a couple months, I asked my boss if I could go looking for new business on rainy days. He said sure. I headed to my old neighborhood. I went to houses that were close enough to my old house that I could tell who was coming and going. One day, I offered to mow lawns for free to help that person's business. I got lucky. Our longtime neighbor, Mrs. Atwater, didn't recognize me. We mostly just waved at each other when I lived there, plus she had poor eyesight, yellow spot degeneration. The Jarvis were new to the neighborhood and had never met me anyway. From these two homes, I was able to figure out Darren and Trudy's basic daily routine. Trudy stayed home with her son instead of working at the winery. I mentioned to Mrs. Atwater said that I wanted to approach the neighbors about mowing their lawn, but since they had a small child, I wanted to make sure I didn't disturb his sleep. She told me that Trudy said that Brian, their son, always went down for a nap after he was fed at 10 m. She also mentioned that Trudy sleeps then, too. According to her, it would be a bad time to disturb them. However, for me, it would be the perfect time to do what I wanted to do. One day, when Trudy and the baby weren't home, I looked around the house and yard as if I were putting together an estimate for lawn mowing services. Although I had lived in the house for many years, I wanted to see what had changed. Since I was now a familiar sight in the neighborhood, no one said anything. I was aware of some flaws in the house. One flaw was the reliability of the sliding patio doors. They had to be closed carefully or they wouldn't lock properly. If I could fix it without anyone noticing, I could sneak in that way later. The next day, I put my plan of revenge into action. I was glad to see that no one noticed me fiddling with the sliding doors. I entered the house and headed for the kids' room. I checked Trudy's room first and heard her snoring. I experienced a bout of nostalgia seeing my wife lying peacefully in bed. I went to the baby's room and turned off the baby monitor. I brought a bag to put the baby's things in it. I put the baby in a special baby carrier, which was basically a swaddle carrier so he wouldn't wake up. It worked. I headed to the car I was driving. It was a cheap car that I had bought unregistered from a junk dealer. After putting the baby in the baby stroller, I headed to a motel in a neighboring town. I immediately had a DNA test done and paid for an expedited report. There was no way I was going to kidnap someone else's baby. It was an agonizing wait. The results thrilled me. The boy was mine. I renamed him Jason. I didn't wait long to venture into unknown lands. As you might imagine, I was a direct suspect in the kidnapping. The problem was that Andy Miller no longer existed thanks to some contacts I'd made in prison. I even had a birth certificate with my name and my son's name on it, as well as my wife Layla's. I bought myself a Layla. The girl I had contracted to be my wife was once a teenage runaway who had been in jail many times and had been to drug rehab twice. She had just gotten out of rehab and was back to doing bad things for a living. She jumped at the chance to start over. Sharing a bed with me didn't matter much to her. She said she wanted to make love to only one man for a change. We drove around in a car with a fake registration and a borrowed license plate until we found a town where people seemed to mind each other's business. Maybe they brought in a lot of people from the Witness Protection Program. The WPP was supposed to be our backup if we felt someone got too nosy or found something wrong with our IDs. I learned that there was no major lawn mowing business in town, so I started my own business. Layla ran the office and the repair part of the business. She knew about engines from her brothers, so it didn't take long for me to tell her about the most likely malfunctions in lawn mowers and how to fix them. This job allowed her to take care of Jason in the shop. We became an integral part of a close-knit community. After a few years, we began to relax, although we never completely let our guard down. From time to time, we heard of the kidnapping of a young child from the poor Edwards family, Darren and Trudy. A large reward was offered for his safe return. The reward was so great that there was one couple who, after no one had found the boy for over a year, tried to pass off their own son as him in order to get the money. Although Darren and Trudy didn't think it was their son, they did a DNA test to prove it for sure. The boy's DNA did not match either Darren's DNA or Trudy's DNA. Trudy was upset that her hopes had been realized only to have them dashed. Some TV news stations showed interviews with distraught parents. It was hard for me to see Trudy crying on TV and begging for her son to be returned safe and sound for 2 seconds. The fool and asshole got what they deserved. Of course, they probably wouldn't have agreed. Gradually, over the years, we heard less and less about the kidnapped Edwards boy. In our town, Jason looked so much like me that no one doubted he was my son. Every now and then, someone would say he had Layla's eyes or ears, but mostly he looked like me. I was proud of my family. Layla stayed sober and gained a good amount of weight. She was very attractive. Layla was no longer the frazzled ex-addict I had rescued. She had gained confidence and pride in herself through her work and motherhood. After putting Jason to bed one night, she confided in me that being Jason's mother had saved her life. Whenever she was tempted to deviate, she realized that doing so would jeopardize her status as Jason's mother. The temptation vanished. Layla was crazy about Jason. I found it hard to believe she wasn't his real mother. They'd definitely grown close. I was a little jealous, but Jason and I became buddies when he got into sports. Although Layla and I weren't married, the lovemaking between us was no worse than when I was married to my so-called true love. At the time, I thought, I hope this goes on forever. I think I've jinxed myself. Jason was 13 years old when the shit hit the mark. One night we were at home getting ready for dinner when I heard a megaphone sound outside ordering us to come out with our hands up. I looked out from behind the curtain. Every police car in town, A couple state patrol cars and a car that looked like an FBI car were parked in front of our house, with flashers on the cars and people with guns pointed at the house. Jason asked what was going on. That's when I told him our story. He refused to believe that Layla wasn't his mother. I told him that she was actually his mother, but there was another woman who had given birth to him. The FBI called me on my cell phone, and I told them we needed a few minutes to talk to each other. He tried to talk me into sending the boy away first, but I refused. I didn't want some flighty cop determined to make a name for himself. He gave me a deadline. When the deadline passed, I told him we had one demand. They had to send a nurse to take a DNA sample from me and the boy. We would peacefully walk out when they had the results. He said it would take too long to get the results. I replied, "If you are FBI, you can come up with something better." The idiot asked if I had a gun. I described in detail the snub-nosed .38 caliber pistol I used to shoot at the range my dad owned. I just didn't tell them that it was still in my father's house. They agreed to my terms. DNA samples were taken. Shortly thereafter, an FBI employee told me there was a problem. The boy's mother and father arrived and refused to submit their son's DNA sample for analysis, even though it had already been taken. He said he could not test it without the approval of his mother and father. I told him that his father, meaning me, had given him permission. I made another call to get leverage. Suddenly, reporters got wind of this turn of events in the kidnapping story. They started asking Darren and Trudy if I was the boy's biological father. Although they vigorously denied it, it was too scandalous a story to avoid publication and broadcast. I then made calls on my cell phone until I received a call from one of the reporters. I told him more about what had happened to me. I told them about the false accusations, the theft of my business and my wife, my time in jail, and the kidnapping, or, as I put it, the return of my son to his father. I informed them that I had DNA tested before I even took my son. I said I would have returned the boy if he had belonged to Darren and Trudy. As soon as the story came out, it blew up, despite being told as claimed by the kidnapper. There was tremendous support from the local community who had known us for about 12 years. They were screaming at the police to allow DNA testing. A local lawyer agreed to petition a judge for the testing, the judge whose lawn I was mowing. The deal was done. The FBI would test if I released the boy and surrendered to them. Given the strong emotions and the danger this posed to Jason and Layla, I agreed to the deal. Jason got out first. Trudy came out from behind the police car and ran up to enclose him in a hug. She yelled, "Brian! Brian!" his real name. He pushed her away from him as she approached and shouted, "You are not my mother!" Trudy collapsed to the ground in despair. The doctor began to examine Jason for injuries. He did not cooperate and yelled to the police, "Please, don't hurt my parents." Layla came out next. No one knew what to think of her. Jason broke free, ran up to Layla, and clung to her as hard as he could. At the sight of that, Trudy sobbed even harder. I think she thought it was supposed to be her hug. Everyone seemed to be crying, including the people in the crowd. I waited for things to calm down. I slowly walked out with my hands held high, yelling that I didn't have a weapon. I was ordered to stop and knelt down with my hands behind my head. Suddenly, I realized something didn't make sense. Where was Darren? He should have been here, comforting Trudy right now. The realization of my impending danger and the bullet from his rifle hit simultaneously. I was unconscious. When I regained consciousness, I raised my hand and jingled the handcuffs attached to the rail of my bed. The nurse called for the doctor. He came in and said, "Welcome back to the world of the living." I didn't like that, and I told him so. I didn't want to go back to prison and be away from my son and my common-law wife. He said I should wait and talk to other people. A lawyer I knew came into my room. He said he was the one who had volunteered to represent me. You won't believe all of this happened. He was right. Darren was caught trying to leave the state and arrested for attempted murder. He and Trudy were being investigated for false embezzlement charges against me. The company was in the hands of the trustees until clear ownership was established. Layla took the initiative to introduce Jason Bryan to his birth mom and to be civil to her. I was so proud of her. Trudy recognized that she and Darren knew I was probably the father, especially after he was born. Darren and I are not much alike. Trudy's quick divorce and marriage was partly to convince others that the baby was Darren's child. The lawyer continued to smile. The best news is that the governor has commuted your sentence to a full pardon on the embezzlement charge. You are no longer a convicted felon. I'm trying to get the kidnapping charge dropped. I think I can reduce it to parental intervention. I've also prepared a lawsuit against Darren, Trudy, and the state for false accusations, arrest, and imprisonment. I saw dollar signs in his eyes. Wait a moment with that. I need to talk to Layla and Jason first. Okay? Cell phone rings. Just let me know when you want me to apply. Layla spent some time in prison for aiding and abetting a kidnapping. When it was determined that I had taken my child without the other parent's permission, the kidnapping charge was dropped against me as well as Layla. Trudy allowed her to visit Jason. I was glad she did. When Layla found out I was awake, she came to the hospital. She cried tears of joy when she saw me. That got me thinking. Finally, I said, you continue to amaze me. I feel like the luckiest person in the world. She smiled. You're lying in bed with a bullet wound that almost grazed your heart. You're handcuffed to the bed. There are still accusations of parental interference against you, and you can't mow lawns in your condition. What the hell makes you lucky? I have a wife and a son. You mean Trudy and Bryan? No, you and Jason. I had trouble naming him by his birth name. Well, I guess I do qualify as your common-law wife. Hopefully not for long. Layla, will you marry me? Are you sure, Andy, or are you over-medicated? My real name is Julie, by the way. I'm pretty sure whatever your name is. Yeah, but can we get married before you go to jail, if you go to jail? Do you think Bryan, would want to be my best man? A voice shouted from the threshold. You can rest assured I would, and you can call me Jason. You have the right. You're my father. He came over and hugged me, trying not to cry. I understand you went out with Trudy. How'd it go? At first I was angry because her husband shot you. I thought maybe she was in on it. Once I was convinced she wasn't, it was just awkward for a while. She confessed to everything. I know she's in a lot of trouble, but I hope she doesn't spend too much time in jail. I don't think she wants to talk to me. She doesn't think you want to talk to her. I'd really like to know why. The woman's voice was clear but soft, because I was selfish, stupid, and naive. Darren seduced me and convinced me that you were robbing us of our fair share of the money. He was so dominant, while you were, well, more submissive. It didn't take me long to realize what a mistake I had made. Before I knew it, Bryan was taken away from me, and that was all I could think about for years. Darren continued to give me hope that he would be found and returned to us. Divorcing him seemed too much of a hassle. We knew you were the father, but in our minds, he was our son. A part of me had been missing for years. No, wait. 2 parts of me had been missing for years. Now I have them both back, just so I know they will be taken from me when I go to prison. I know. Do the crime, do the time. What do you think of Layla's work raising your son? The more I learn about her, the more grateful I am for what she has done. She's a real gem, Andy. Take good care of her. I'm planning on it. Trudy handed over her custody rights to Bryan Jason before going to jail. Layla and I were granted custody. We made sure he visited her regularly. The only break in our visits to her was when Layla and I went on our honeymoon. I couldn't get used to calling her Julie. Darren was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder and making false accusations against me. It wasn't easy for him to get used to prison. After a couple of stab wounds, he took his own life. His shares in the company were divided between Trudy and me according to his will. Trudy transferred the fiduciary rights to her shares to me. I took over the company again. Layla became our chief financial officer. I was proud when Jason said he wanted to work for me after college. When Trudy got out of prison, she took over as CFO of the company, and she still had her original shares, plus half of Darren's shares. Layla had more important responsibilities, being a stay-at-home mom to Jason's younger brother and sister. Trudy lived alone in a small house. She never went on a date, although there seemed to be a few men who hoped she would change her mind. Right now, she is focusing her attention on one particular young man who is going to college. She says she might be interested in another man later. Sometimes people ask me if I regret kidnapping my son and taking him away from his mother. I say, no, hell no. It wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a regular kidnapping. The end